All right, let's begin. First thing I want to do is remind you that you have a map that you're going to need to place the continents on. You'll need to identify the 7 continents. I will not be giving you those names. You'll need to do that yourself. I am not expecting perfect spelling, so don't get all excited about that. But I should be able to figure out what you are writing. Remember, Europe is located right here. Do not get it placed over into this area. It will be incorrect. So it needs to be in this general spot. Asia, Australia, Antarctica, Africa, South America, and North America. All right, once you've got that done, then you will need to continue with the quiz, or I'm sorry, the test, which of course is going to be on Moodle. Now, we identified 5 nations that we are going to focus on a lot during this whole class, the whole year, and that's Spain, France, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and England. Those are the 5 that we're going to begin with. They are pretty much at the heart of this age of enlightenment, this time frame during the 16 to the 1700s. Now, focusing on the age of absolutism, which was prior to the Age of Enlightenment, I want you to have an idea of how this all progressed. And every single country was ruled by a monarch. A monarch, of course, is a king or a queen, and they are the leader of a government. Now, by adding the Y on the end of a monarch, you now have a monarchy, which is the government, the name of the government, a political system. The monarch leads or is in charge of the monarchy. Now, how did the monarch get their power? Well, through 2 ways. First, they are born into it, which is known as heredity. But they can also take power through war and conquest. Then, in addition, there is this idea of divine right. Well, divine right is a belief that a king or queen's right to rule comes directly from God. And for an absolute monarchy, this means that they have total control. Now, if you have your power to rule through God, most of these guys then believe that, well, then I have the right to do whatever I want to do. And they did. Now, an absolute monarch was ruled in France, Spain, Russia, and Austria-Prussia. Now, there's one missing there, and that's the nation of England. Now, England was the exception to the rule. They did not have an absolute monarch. Instead, they had a limited monarchy. Now, who ruled with them was the Parliament. This is a group of aristocracy who helped rule England, kind of like our Congress does today. Parliament is going to grow in strength from the 1400s to the 1600s, and in 1689 they pass acts known as the English Bill of Rights. This is a big deal. Nowhere else were people the common people's rights were beginning to be accepted by a monarchy or a ruling body like the Parliament. So they established five things that are important for us to remember. First and foremost, they have the superiority of the Parliament over the monarchy. They are the top. Instead of the monarchy being at the top, they are at the top. Now, they also control the spending of the country. English citizens then have a right to trial by jury. They abolish unjust or cruel punishments, and finally grant limited religious freedoms to the common people. So the bottom 3 right here, 3, 4, and 5, those are focused on the citizens of England, giving them rights that they just didn't have before. So the English people were very proud of being English. Now, a limited monarchy is limited by a government in which a constitution or legislative body limits the monarch's power. That means the monarch now has to consider more than just their wants and needs. They need to be paying close attention to, well, in the case of England, Parliament. Parliament makes decisions and limits their power. Also, as time goes on, they have to also create a constitution that will provide laws for not only the king to abide by, but also parliament. So it's a government whose power is defined and limited by law. And obviously a constitution is going to play a big role in our own nation. We'll look at that a little bit later. Now in Europe, the religion was mostly Catholic. Most of the people in Europe itself belonged to the Catholic Church, and of course the Pope was the head of the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church also had a lot of influence on the nations that existed in Europe during this time. Now, the Protestants were a much smaller group. In England in particular, they will be the Church of England, and the Church of England then will be the ruler, or the in charge of the Church of England will be the king. If you remember, I told you about Henry VIII and his wives, and that pretty much established the Protestant religion in England. Now, economics in Europe was mercantilism. And this is an economic system that's designed to unify and increase the power, especially the monetary wealth of a nation. It's all about the wealth of the nation. It really wasn't much about the people. So monarchs in Europe believed that a nation's wealth was measured in silver and gold. They wanted the wealth. That was prestige. That was important to them. Unfortunately, in Europe, there really wasn't much silver and gold. So they had to look to other areas of the world to increase their treasures. For example, Spain spent a lot of time in South America and in Latin America, or Central America, and gained a great deal of wealth through gold and silver that they gained through the different empires that they eventually will take over, the Aztec and the Inca and the Mayans. All right. Now, we're going to move into the Enlightenment time. I assigned to you a video, a YouTube video that had questions. These are the questions that you were supposed to complete. Now, many of you have not done this. You have given me all kinds of excuses as to why you haven't gotten it done. There is no excuse. We have plenty of time in intervention. You've had plenty of time to get your tablets working. So I'm not going to accept this as being an excuse any longer. You can go in. I'm going to identify the 5 answers here to these questions that will be on the test, but you still need to get this stuff answered. You will not receive full credit any longer. In fact, you won't receive a lot of credit, but some credit is better than a 0, so get this work done. Now, number 2 is what I'm going to focus on, or at least these with stars. What replaced faith and age-old beliefs, according to the Enlightenment or scientific thinkers, and that was the idea of logic and reason. They believed logic and reason could explain what was going on in society. And so scientific reasoning was applied to political, economic, and social philosophy. And by the late 17th and 18th centuries, it will become known as the Age of Enlightenment. Things are changing during this time. And so I asked also what famous document was greatly influenced by the above answer. The Age of Enlightenment, meaning the Declaration of Independence. Then the last question, Thomas Edison said, all progress and all success comes from thinking. Very important. Thinking is very important when you take your test. So the more we can encourage you to think and use your brain, the better. So let's continue on with our notes. So the Age of Enlightenment begins with this scientific revolution, this change in the way we're beginning to see the natural world. This is a major turning point in history. We are no longer following a path of subsistence. Now we're starting to look at our world as looking at our world in a new and different way. These 17th century European thinkers really challenged the old beliefs and the traditional faith by using reason and logic. Now you see there are new ideas that I've identified here, prior to this time, most everybody, all authorities, saw the earth as the center of the universe. Well, thanks to the scientific revolution, we then began to realize that the earth wasn't the center, but instead the sun was the center of our universe. In addition, some additional inventions and ideas, the telescope, calculus, gravity, geometry. All of these become important new ideas that will be built upon as time goes forward. Now, I have a question here that will be on the test, so I want you to be thinking about it. We went over it in class. Question is, please explain the use of reason and logic as it relates to the Enlightenment thinkers. Right, this question is going to focus on what you've learned about the Enlightenment thinkers, what's important, what are their main ideas, and why are these so important? Think about the time. Think about how poor the people were, the normal people were, most of the people in any society were extremely poor. So why were these ideas so important to them? Now, scientific revolution really was not liked by traditional authority, and the traditional authority of that time was the church and the monarchy. And they resisted these ideas. They feared loss of power. They did not want any change. Royalty just didn't want to be questioned. That just was unacceptable. They feared the unknown. They feared what was going to happen as a result of all of these people now know that the church and the monarchy may not have all the answers. So church officials were also not willing to be questioned. So this was a toughie for them. All right. Now, by the late 17th, 18th century, we know that the Enlightenment is in full bloom. Enlightenment thinkers are applying the scientific reasoning to politics, economics, and society. They're looking at ways to make these things better. Mostly what was going on prior to this is that nobody really cared about the poor or the majority of the people as long as they were providing for the needs of the very wealthy. Well, that was unacceptable to the European thinkers or Enlightenment thinkers. They believed things could get better. And so the idea of, and this just goes right along with this question, what important changes did the Enlightenment thinkers suggest? Well, they believed in natural rights, which of course was life, liberty, and property. They believed in things like freedom of speech, or the three branches, or that were checks and balances in government to prevent government from being too powerful. They believed in all those things. Again, this is information directly from the Enlightenment thinkers page that I gave you. All right, now here's a copy of that. We look at the social contract, which was established between government and the people for an orderly society. You see here Locke and his natural rights, life, liberty, and property. The next four I'm not going to go over, but you can see I've highlighted. This is important stuff. Make sure you're paying attention to this. Finally, the last one is Smith, who believed government had a duty to protect society, administer justice, and provide public works. All right, now we've gone over this briefly, the Enlightenment. Now we got to look at the American Revolution and its relationship to the Enlightenment. Now we know the Enlightenment ideas spread from Europe to the 13 colonies, and those Enlightenment ideas spread out through the colonies. Now, for the Enlightenment thinkers, they saw the old ways as being unscientific and irrational. This was not the way things should be going in their eyes. They believed it was not factual and not reasonable, the way people were having to live their lives prior to the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment thinkers believed that their ideas would ensure a just society. And that was important because they wanted social justice, which is fair laws and consequences, and they also wanted happiness. They wanted to bring happiness to much of the world, not just to the wealthy, but to all the people. Now, we're not talking about silly happiness. We're talking about a contentment, a life that is free of worry that the government may take everything away. So this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property was important to the Enlightenment thinkers. Now, they're going to play a big role in the American Revolution. These ideas are coming to the 13 colonies, they're spreading, and so what's happening? So let's take a brief history, look at a brief history of the 13 colonies. I want you to focus on the fact that the 13 colonies that had English origins. That's significant. It's significant because these people saw themselves as British citizens and that they were loyal to the king. But it also meant they had all the rights of those who lived in England. That's what the people in the Americas believed. Now, as the colonies are growing, they are pretty much being left alone by the British Crown. They're involved in other things. So, and the colonies were able to do a pretty good job of self-government. And so because of that, it wasn't necessary for England to interfere or be a part of this government. Now, while we're growing, we're also becoming prosperous, wealthy, rich. That's pretty cool because that means we are not stuck in the same way of life that existed in Europe. And that leads us to this next slide. Well, hang on, I will jump to the next slide. I want to talk about this slide first. So, why did we revolt? Well, we revolted mostly because of these issues right here. On the test, this is going to be the question, why did we revolt? You need to summarize this information that you see right here. You need to talk to me about the French and Indian War and how it caused the England or the king to have basically gone bankrupt. You need to talk about how the trade acts become very restrictive and enforced, and then they become then they are being enforced by the British, who come and begin to really pay closer attention to the colonies. They impose new taxes that support the British troops in North America. This is making the Americans unhappy. The fact that the colonists still see themselves as Englishmen, but that their rights as Englishmen were being ignored. And so they begin to cry this idea, no taxation without representation. They want to be represented in Parliament. The thing is, they're not getting any representation in Parliament. And so what's beginning to happen is a change from the idea that the Americans saw themselves as Englishmen. Instead, they began to see themselves as Americans. Not Englishmen, but Americans. And so this is the slide that I was going to be talking to you about. These social distinctions had changed, which really makes them feel less like an Englishman and more like an American. The class lines don't exist like they did in England. There are far more opportunities for people here in this country. It allows, for example, someone who arrives poor, who works hard, could possibly become wealthy, or at least better off than they were in England. And so these class distinctions become blurred. They do not mean the same thing as in England. There's opportunities here, and that all people, could take advantage of them. So most of the colonists are getting an increased sense of destiny separate from England. Remember, they're beginning to feel like Americans, not Englishmen. So as a result, we have the Declaration of Independence. They no longer want to be a part of England. They want to sever their ties. And so Thomas Jefferson writes this declaration. And in it he establishes the idea that of popular sovereignty, which is all government power comes from the people. Now that's pretty significant since nowhere else in Europe does that exist. The people have no say, next to no say in their government. Only England has, but it's still pretty limited. Where here, there's a very little limitation on the fact that the people are giving power or the right for the government to rule. So Jefferson writes the Declaration, but why does he write it? Well, he needs to explain to the world why we can no longer be a part of England. Why are we going to sever our ties with them? And after the Declaration is written, the Continental Congress, of course, accepts it, and then we demand our independence from England. So we have to fight the war. I mean, we just because we say we're independent doesn't necessarily mean it is until we fight and win the war. Once we've done that, now we've got to actually get this country on its feet, and we have to establish our laws, and we do that by writing a constitution. We establish what's known as a federal republic, which means that the power is divided between the national government and the states. The Constitution establishes this, and so not only does the national government have powers, but the states, the individual states, have powers. Now, these are Enlightenment ideas. They didn't pull these just out of their head. They were hearing about these Enlightenment ideas. And so the idea of separation of powers that you see here, part of the Constitution, checks and balances. Remember, those were Montesquieu's ideas. They were a part of the Enlightenment. The Bill of Rights, although we didn't see the Bill of Rights in the Enlightenment thinkers sheet that I gave you, you should recognize that they talk about the basic rights of people and that the government must protect these rights. That's essential. So, although the Constitution has a majority of Enlightenment ideas, it still establishes the laws of the land. And the fact that we as a people have abided by those laws means a lot. Now, in conclusion, our country then becomes a symbol of freedom. Becomes a symbol of freedom to most everywhere in the world. It becomes the most progressive government in the world. It is a symbol of freedom to European countries and reformers in Latin America. So a lot of people are looking to us and saying, whoa, we want that. We want those freedoms. We want that same type of government. Now, Constitution is going to be copied and adapted by many. And the French Revolution occurs soon after, and it will topple their monarchy in the name of liberty and equality. Now, we are, for much of the world, for a long period of time, this symbol of freedom. In fact, we still are pretty much a symbol of freedom for much of the rest of the world. So, we can be very proud of who we are as a country. All right, so that ends our notes. Now, listen. You need to be studying for this test. Please take the time. I want to see every single one of you get an A. Remember, the test is broken up into multiple choice and short answer essay. You will be using your tablets, unless I can get the computer lab. We'll see about that. But you need to be prepared to have the tablet with you. Do not assume we're going to have the computer lab. Have the tablet with you. All right. Well, you guys have a really good rest of the weekend. I'm jealous that you have Monday off. I have to be here. So you take care. Thanks. Bye.